This is one of the most important episodes of the BlenderTutorial course. So if you're not in a good mood or don't feel up to it, I strongly recommend saving this lesson for another time. Today, we're going to dive into some essential tools and methods in Blender. We'll cover more advanced topics like collections, advanced use of the Bevel Modifier for more precise control over individual edges, adding edge loops for better mesh control. You'll be introduced to a new modifier called Subdivision Surface, which is incredibly useful, and I bet you'll love it. Though we'll only cover the basics for now. We'll also explore another essential modifier called Mirror and learn more about object origin and how to move it around. And take a quick look at the little circle in the middle of the scene called the cursor, which we've been ignoring for quite a while. We'll also learn how to apply modifiers and how to fill open meshes. Once again, make sure you're ready to fully engage with this video because we are about to take a big step forward in your progress. So, if you're prepared, let's get started. Today, we're going to create this, Molly's Nightstand. I've imported the blueprint images, and in the outliner, I've named the blueprints according to their view angle. If you're unsure how to do this, please refer to the previous episodes. As always, you can download the blueprints from our ArtStation or Gumroad page, which I've included the links in the description. In the outliner, objects are sorted alphabetically, which is why the blueprints are arranged this way and not in order. To make things easier, you can group the blueprints images into a dedicated collection. To do this, click on this icon to create a new collection, then hold down the Control key, click on the reference images, and drag and drop them into the new collection you just made. Now, I'll double-click on the collection's name and change it to blueprints. If you want, you can right-click on the collection icon here and assign a color to it. Okay, by clicking on this icon, I'll make all objects in the collection unselectable. Please note that any setting you apply to a collection will override its sub-items. Even though the blueprints are selectable, I still can't select them. So you've now learned two main uses of collection in Blender: organizing and sorting items in the scene, and overriding settings for items all at once. Another important thing to remember about collections is that any object you create will be a part of the currently selected collection. For example, if the blueprints collection is selected and I create a cube, the cube will be a part of that collection. But don't worry, you can always drag it to another collection if needed. And don't worry too much about the other options in the outliner for now. Knowing this much is enough, and we'll cover more features as we need them. Okay, I'll delete the cube, create a new collection, and name it Molly's Nightstand. I'll make sure it's selected, and now we're ready to start modeling. Creating collections isn't essential, but if you start organizing and working cleanly from now, it will significantly speed up your workflow and make the work less exhausting. Even if you return to your project years later, you'll easily understand what's going on in your scene. In team projects, your colleagues will appreciate working with you more if you're organized, but if you're not a people person, feel free to skip collections and naming items. By pressing the 1 key on the numpad, I'll switch to the front view, I'll create a cube, press Alt-Z to enable X-ray mode, and then press Tab to go into edit mode, where I'll make all the changes. I'll select the top vertices, move them up, and press S to scale and adjust them according to the reference. Notice that I didn't select any axis, so the scale is changing uniformly across all axes. Now, I'll move to the bottom vertices and adjust their position and scale according to the reference. Next, I'll press 3 on the numpad, and you'll see that the vertices don't match the reference. If I try to adjust the vertices in the right view to match the reference, they won't match to the front view reference. This is a common issue because blueprints aren't always perfectly aligned. Sometimes you may need to adjust the blueprint itself. I'll undo the changes until my mesh matches the front view that I had aligned earlier, and now I'll switch back to the right view so I can select the right view blueprint. Now I'll come here and enable the selectable option for this collection. I'll select the right view image, switch to object mode, and then move the blueprint slightly up along the Z-axis. So I'll match it with the mesh this time. Click on this icon again, so the blueprints won't be selectable anymore. As you can see, the nightstand isn't straight and needs some curvature. But when I switch to perspective view and enter edit mode, I notice there's no component in the middle that I can adjust. So we need to learn about a new tool called Loop Cut. To activate this tool, press Ctrl R, and when you hover over any edge, you'll see a loop highlighted around that edge, giving you a preview of the loop cut. But be aware that once the loop cut is active, navigation is disabled, which means you won't be able to orbit with the middle mouse button. If you press the view change keys on the numpad, the number of edge loops increases. For example, pressing 3 highlights 3 edge loops, and pressing 1 highlights 31 edge loops. You can see this number at the top, okay? So you can delete the edge loops with backspace, and if you press 1 again, it highlights a single edge loop. You can also adjust the number of edge cuts or loops by scrolling your mouse wheel. Alright, I'll right click to cancel. So make sure to first switch to the view you want, like I'll do with the front view, and then activate the loop cut tool with Ctrl R. Hover here and just click once. Now, when you move your mouse, you'll see the loop is added and the tool is still active, asking you to set the position of the loop cut. You can slide it wherever you want, which is why this tool is actually called loop cut and slide. Then you can apply it with a left click. Wow, that was intense, right? Okay, I want this loop cut exactly in the middle of the mesh. Let's undo and do it again. Step 1, make sure the mesh is selected. Step 2, make sure you are in edit mode by pressing tab. Step 3, choose your view. And step 4, activate the loop cut tool with Ctrl R. So the tool works in 2 stages, right? With the left click, decide where you want to place the loop cut. Then to place it exactly in the center, instead of left clicking, just right click. Note that the right clicking in the second stage place the loop cut in the center, while in the first stage, it cancels the tool. Okay? I recommend practicing this right now to make sure you fully understand how to use it, because if you've never used it before, you might run into some challenges at first. Now that we've added a loop cut, simply ensure that all 4 points or edges are selected, press S, and without selecting any axis, scale it to match your reference image. Okay, we need another loop cut here, so press Ctrl R, left click, and finally right click to place it in the middle. Then press S and adjust the scale. Make sure not to select any axis while scaling here, because if you scale along the X-axis, for example, it won't match the reference when you switch to the right view. So after pressing S, don't choose any axis, so the scaling remains uniform. Now you can see it matches the reference in the right view as well. Okay, we'll add one more edge loop at the bottom and another at the top. That's it. Now I'll switch back to perspective view, press Alt-Z to exit X-ray mode, and press Tab to return to object mode so I can see it better. Okay, I'll right click and select Shade Auto Smooth. Make sure the mesh is selected and then choose Shade Auto Smooth, otherwise nothing will happen. Please note that this option is only available in object mode. If you right click in edit mode, a different menu will appear that might scare you. So remember, Shade Auto Smooth is only accessible in object mode. We'll leave the details like beveling the edges for the end of the process, okay? Always remember, in modeling, it's better to start with the overall shape and then move to the details. The reason will become clear as you go through this course. Okay, let's move on to the top section of the Nightstand. I'll go to the front view and create a cube. I'll press Alt-Z as well. I'll move the cube up here. And now I'll switch to edit mode. And by pressing A, I'll make sure all the active components are selected. Then I'll press S to scale the cube to match my reference. Next, I'll press 1 on the number row to activate the vertex select mode and bring the top vertices down. I'll adjust the position of the bottom vertices as well. In the top view, you can see that it also matches with the reference. The only thing left is to soften the edges, which we'll do later using the bevel tool. So for now, this part is done. Now I'll press Tab to go back to the object mode, switch to front view, and let's start working on the drawer. I'll create a new cube and move it up. Then I'll press Tab, scale it down to match the reference image, and adjust the top and bottom vertices accordingly. I'll go to the right view, select the vertices, and match them with the reference in this view as well. I'll return to the front view. Before adding loop cuts to match it with the reference, I'll press Tab and in object mode, use Shift-D to duplicate it and move it down. Okay? Since the size of these parts are different, there is no need to duplicate them as linked objects. Also, notice that I did the duplication in object mode, not in edit mode. This is very important, okay? Now I'll press Tab and in edit mode, select these vertices and move them down, and adjusting their scale as well. In the right view, I'll also position them slightly back, and keep in mind that the blueprint isn't very accurate, so don't worry too much about it, just get it roughly close to the reference. I'll go back to the front view, and now that we are in edit mode, let's add loop cuts to this mesh. I'll press Ctrl R, left click, and then right click. Okay, I'll press S to scale and adjust it. Now I'll add a vertical loop cut. Then I'll click and drag to select these vertices, and by holding Shift, I'll click and drag here to select these vertices as well. Notice that the middle vertices were not selected, okay? You can use Shift to add to your selection, and by holding Ctrl, you can remove from your selection, okay? So these hotkeys are very useful. Now I'll adjust the position of the vertices. Okay, next I'll go to the lower section and move the vertices to match the reference. I'll switch to the right view, select these middle vertices and move them slightly forward. Okay, remember I said the modeling is easy in theory? You just need to move components around and shape the mesh into what you want. Now we are experiencing it. Isn't so cool? Alright, now let's move on to the top drawer. Again, we'll use the same techniques. There's nothing new here. Just add components and match the vertices with the reference. That's it. Also, don't worry about adding too many loop cuts to create exact curves. Later, we'll learn about a modifier that works like magic and smooths out all these curves for us. Just no rush. Just follow along with me until we get there. Now let's work on the legs. Simply create a cube, bring it down, and adjust the vertices to match the reference. I'll bring these vertices down, then select these and move them up a bit, and adjusting their scale as well. And move these vertices slightly to the right too. Just try to align this edge with the curve of the main body of the Nightstand. Okay, go to the right view and adjust the position of the vertices in this view as well. Alright, this looks good. For the other three legs, we can use the Mirror Modifier, which we'll discuss when we get to adding the details. And we'll leave the drawer handles for the final steps, okay? What we've done so far is called blockout in modeling. It's when we simply model the different parts of the asset with meshes without adding details and position them according to the reference. So the next step is to add details. Let's start with the main body of the Nightstand. I'll click and drag to select all meshes. Now I want to deselect the main body. Okay, what's the shortcut for that? Yes, Control. But if I hold Control and click, it doesn't select. Be careful. When holding Control, you must click and drag to deselect, okay? A simple click won't work. Just click and drag to deselect. Alright, now I'll press H to hide the selected meshes. And now let's soften the edges. To do this, we can either use the Bevel tool or the Bevel Modifier, which, as I mentioned before, is non-destructive and gives us more control. So for this, I'll make sure the object is selected, then go to the modifier properties, and under the generate section, I'll click on Bevel. Make sure that in the object properties, the scale is set to 1 in all axes. If it's not, as I explained before, press Ctrl A and then click on Scale. Okay, I'll go back to the modifier properties and set the segments to 3 and adjust the amount. But as you can see here, the softness of the top and bottom edges is different from the edges around the mesh. But right now, the bevel is applied evenly to all the edges. What's the solution? Another bevel? Well, sort of. The solution lies in this option within the Bevel Modifier, the limit method. By default, it's set to angle, and the angle is set to 30 degrees. This means the bevel will be applied to any edges that has an angle of less than 30 degrees. Not even 30 degrees, just less than 30. To understand this better, consider this cube. Its angles are 90 degrees, right? If I set the angle to 90 degrees here, you'll see that the bevel doesn't apply. But if I change the angle to 89.99 degrees, you'll see the bevel effect appears. So that's how the angle works. But there is another option called weight, which allows us to specify how much bevel is applied to each edge. Okay, let's do it. Right now, it seems like the bevel hasn't been applied, right? Go to edit mode and select the edges around the mesh. Hold Alt and click on this edge and make sure to click a little higher so that this vertical edge gets selected. Now let's move on to the next edge. This time, hold Shift along with Alt because we want to add to our selection, right? So Shift, Alt, and click. Select the remaining two edges the same way. Now, click on this small arrow that's hiding here. The shortcut is the N key, which works as a toggle. Okay, in this item tab, we're only concerned with this section. Since we're applying the bevel to the edges, we'll work with this option in the edge data section, okay? Keep in mind that these options are only available in edit mode. So in object mode, you won't have access to them. Now we can easily adjust the mean bevel weight here to determine how much bevel is applied to these edges. And since these edges have more curvature, I'll increase the segments a bit, maybe to 5, so that the curve is better represented. Okay, so here you can see that when this option is set to 1, it means the full amount we specified is applied to these edges. Now let's select the top and bottom edges and hold Shift and select these edges. And now if I go back and change the mean bevel weight here, you'll see it doesn't give us the result we want. So I'll set it back to 0. Now that we've specified that the Bevel Modifier should only apply to these edges with this amount and not affect to the other edges, we can apply a second Bevel Modifier. This time, leave the limit method set to angle and just adjust the amount and segments to get the desired result. Keep in mind that because the first bevel softened the edges, the second bevel won't affect the edges due to the change in angle. Okay? One very important thing about modifiers is that their order matters. Modifiers are applied from top to bottom. This means if I click and drag this icon to rearrange the bevels, you'll see it has a completely different effect. So always be mindful of the order of modifiers. Okay, I'll undo to restore the original order of the modifiers and press N to close this panel. Remember, you can use this icon to toggle between the before and after, which is very useful. And that's it for the main body of the nightstand. Okay, I'll press Alt-H to unhide all the objects. And now let's move on to the top section. This time, I'll select everything except this mesh and press H to hide them. I'll select the object, make sure its scale is correct. And in the modifier properties, I'll apply the Bevel Modifier. Okay, I'll press Tab and then the N key. I'll select these top edges. And don't forget to set the limit method to weight. Alright, I'll come here and set the mean bevel weight to 1. Now I'll switch to the front view and adjust the bevel setting to match the reference. Alright, I'll press Tab to go into object mode so I can enable the shade auto smooth option. Okay, I'll go back to edit mode. These edges also need to be beveled, so I'll select them and adjust the mean bevel weight again. I'll switch to the top view and match it with the reference. Okay, now I'll press Alt-H. And that's it for the top part. I'll press N to close this panel too. Alright, let's move on to the drawer. The drawer is really simple. I'll select it and add a bevel modifier. I'll set the segments to 3 and adjust the amount until I get the result I want. Okay, I enable Shade Smooth and I'll do the same for this bottom mesh. I'll apply a bevel modifier, set the segments to 3 and adjust the amount accordingly. Okay, let's activate Shade Smooth for it as well. Alright, I'll select the drawer object again, and this time, to remove the sharpness of these edges, we can use a modifier called Subdivision Surface. It's really simple. Just go to the modifiers section, and under Generate, click on Subdivision Surface. This modifier is super useful. You'll see that it softens the sharp edges in this area and makes the whole mesh smoother. I'll explain more about this modifier later, okay? Now let's move on to copying modifiers, which we covered in the previous episode. First, select the mesh that doesn't have the modifier, then select the drawer object that has the modifiers. After that, press Ctrl L and click on Copy Modifiers. And that's it. Next, let's focus on the legs. I'll adjust the position of this leg a bit, and remember, you don't always have to stick to the reference. If you think making changes will improve the result, simply go ahead and do it. I think this position looks better. And I'll come here and add a bevel modifier to it and set the angle method to weight. I'll go into edit mode and select the surrounding edges. I'll press N and set the mean bevel weight to 1. Then I'll press N again to close this side panel. Then I'll tweak the bevel setting until I get the desired result. Now I'll select these vertices and move them a bit to the side. Okay. I'll also enable Shade Auto Smooth for this, and I'll move these vertices to the side as well. Alright, I'll add another bevel, adjust the amount and segments, and soften these sharp edges a bit more. Okay, I'll collapse these. And now let's move on to the Mirror Modifier to place this leg on all 4 sides of the object. The Mirror Modifier is also under Generate. I'll select it, and here I need to specify the axis I want the mirror to happen along, okay? You can see that in the axis section, the x-axis is selected right now, so it should mirror the leg to the other side. But you'll notice that it's not working correctly. The reason is that the Mirror Modifier defaults to the object's origin point. Remember that little yellow dot we talked about in the previous episode? Here is one of its uses. So, to make the mirror work correctly, we can move the object origin to the center of the scene. Since our asset is symmetrical and we modeled it exactly in the center of the scene, moving the object origin to the scene's center should solve our problem. If the object wasn't modeled in the center, there are other ways to mirror it, which we'll cover later. To change the object origin, select the object, right-click, and under Set Origin, choose Origin to 3D Cursor. What's the 3D cursor? This thing here in the center of the scene is called the 3D cursor, and it can be easily moved. For example, by holding down the Shift key and right-clicking, we can change its position. If you accidentally move it, we can press Shift S, and a seemingly scary menu will pop up. And here you can just select Cursor toward Origin, and it will return to the center of the scene or the word Origin. now you can see that once the origin is in the right place, the mirror modifier is working correctly. Now all you have to do is enable the y-axis in the mirror modifier so the legs are placed on all four sides. And that's it. Now the only thing left is the drawer handles. Simply create a cylinder, rotate it 90 degrees on x-axis, and then from the side view, just adjust the scale and position. I'll also enable Shade Auto Smooth for it. Okay, for this part, create a cube, move it forward a bit, and now just apply a Subdivision Surface Modifier to it. Setting viewport level to 2, and you'll see that the cube has almost turned into a sphere. Okay, now I need to delete the faces of half of this sphere, but when I press Tab, you see that I can't access these new faces in edit mode. I can still only manipulate the cube's faces. To access these faces, I need to apply the modifier. For this, just come here, click on this little arrow, and I should click on apply, but you see that this option is grayed out. This means I need to be in object mode to apply it. Okay, so I'll go back to the object mode, return to this section, and now I can click on apply. Alright, now you can see that the modifier has been applied and I no longer have access to it. Okay, so now if I go back to edit mode, you'll see I can easily select the faces. I'll press the delete key and click on faces. Now I'll adjust its position and scale according to the reference. I'll press S, and since the object origin is right here, I'll select the y-axis and adjust the scale. Okay, I'll enable Shade Auto Smooth and apply a Subdivision Surface Modifier to make it smoother. And that's it. I'll press the / to enter local view, and now I want to close the back of this object. To do this, I press Tab to go into the edit mode, make sure Edge Select mode is active here, and by holding Alt, I'll click on this edge to select all of these edges. Then, since we want to fill this part with faces, I'll click on Grid Fill under the Faces menu. And I'll set the viewport level to 2 here to make it smoother. And that's it. But keep in mind, this isn't the best way to fill this part. But to keep things simple for now, just use this method, okay? And since the back of this object won't be visible, this shading issue doesn't matter at all. Okay, I'll press the / to exit local view mode. I'll select these two objects, press Shift D, and move them down here. Done. And now, our nightstand model is finished. Since we learned a lot of tools and techniques in this episode, I strongly urge you to practice and create this model to make sure you've understood everything we covered here. Otherwise, in the upcoming episodes, where the topics get more advanced, you might run into a lot of problems. Remember, you're not here to watch a movie, you're in the process of learning, and learning without doing is never possible. The only secret sauce that sets you apart from others is practice and doing. Alright, I wish you success and see you in the next episode. Goodbye.